not because he wanted to forget. The opposite, actually. He stopped counting because somewhere around body 47, he realized with creeping certainty that the blue hole was keeping count for him. And the blue hole had a much better memory than any living man should want to possess. The locals called him the Bone Collector, the Gravekeeper, names that should have bothered him more than they did. But after 2 decades of diving into that perfect circle of darkness off the Dahab coast, after 2 decades of bringing up the drowned and the bloated and the things that weren't quite either anymore, Tarek had made peace with his titles. What he hadn't made peace with was what he found down there in the depths. What waited, what whispered, what wanted him to keep coming back. The blue hole sat in the Red Sea like a pupil in a vast blue iris, darker than the surrounding water, deeper than it had any right to be. From the surface it looked almost inviting, tropical blue around the edges, that insane deep azure in the center where the bottom dropped away to 90 meters. 300 feet of water pretending to be a tourist attraction. But Tarek knew better. The blue hole wasn't just deep. It was hungry. He remembered the first 2 bodies he'd recovered like most people remember their first kiss. Martin Gara and Conor O'Regan. 2 Irish boys with their whole lives ahead of them, or so everyone said at the funeral. November 1997. They'd been down there for 3 days before Tarek went after them. When he'd finally reached them at 65 meters, regulators floating beside them like plastic seaweed, their eyes were open. Both of them, Martin and Conor, suspended in the water column, eyes wide and staring up toward the surface, staring at him, through him, and they were smiling, not the rictus grin of drowning victims, not the slack-jawed emptiness of the dead. They were smiling like they'd found something down there, something wonderful, something worth dying for. Tarek had tried to close Martin's eyes when he brought him up. The eyelids wouldn't stay shut. They kept drifting open, kept staring, kept smiling that terrible smile. He'd mentioned it once to the coroner, who'd laughed and told him it was just post-mortem muscle relaxation. Bodies do funny things when they die underwater, but Tarek knew the coroner was wrong. He knew because Martin's eyes had tracked him. Just for a second, just as Tarek was pulling him toward the surface, Martin's dead eyes had followed his movement, had locked onto his face with something that looked almost like pity. The blue hole was calling, and Martin and Conor had answered. Now, 27 years later, Tarek stood on the shore beside the memorial plaques. Over 100 names etched into metal. Over 100 people who'd gone down and never come back up. Not all of them, not officially. The memorial only showed the ones they'd recovered, the ones whose families had paid for the plaques. But Tarek knew the real number was higher, much higher. Some bodies were never found. Some bodies were found but never recovered. The blue hole kept them, and after a while, Tarek understood why. You don't take bones from a graveyard. You don't steal from the collection. The sun was setting, painting the water orange and gold, making the blue hole look like a gateway to hell itself, which Tarek thought might not be too far from the truth. His phone buzzed. He didn't need to check it to know what it said. There was another one down there. There was always another one. This time it was a Russian kid. 23 years old, Yuri something. Lipsky, maybe. The details were already fuzzy in Tarek's mind, the way details always got fuzzy when the blue hole was involved. The kid had gone down yesterday afternoon with some local guide, had descended too deep on regular air, and hadn't come back up. Standard story. The blue hole had a standard story, and it played out over and over like a scratched record. But there was something different this time. Something that made Tarek's hands shake as he checked his dive computer. The kid had been filming. He had a camera with him, depth rated to 75 meters. And the camera had kept recording even after the kid died. Even after he'd settled at 91 meters, face down in the silt, the camera had captured everything. Tarek had seen a lot of things in 20 years. He'd brought up bodies in every stage of decomposition. He'd seen equipment failures and medical emergencies and pure stupidity, but he'd never seen footage from inside the blue hole at depth. No one had. Most cameras couldn't survive the pressure. Most cameras didn't want to, but Yuri's camera had survived. And now the kid's father was in Dahab, sitting in some depressing hotel room, waiting for Tarek to bring his son home. The dive would have to wait until tomorrow morning. That's what Tarek told himself as he walked back toward his small apartment on the beach. The light was wrong. The conditions weren't optimal. He needed rest. All rational excuses that hid the real truth, which was that Tarek was afraid, more afraid than he'd been in years, because something had changed in the blue hole. Something had shifted in the dark water where the bottom dropped away, and Tarek could feel it the way you feel a storm coming, the way you feel eyes on you in an empty room. That night, Tarek dreamed of drowning. He was floating in perfect darkness, the pressure crushing his chest, his regulator torn from his mouth. Above him, impossibly far away, he could see the surface glowing with sunlight. He kicked toward it, desperate, lungs burning, but he wasn't moving. Something was holding his ankle, something with fingers that felt like coral, rough and sharp and cold. He looked down, and Martin Gara stared back up at him from the depths, still smiling, still wearing his diving gear from 1997. Behind Martin, 100 other shapes moved in the darkness. The collection, the graveyard, all of them reaching up, all of them smiling, all of them whispering the same thing in a voice that bubbled through dead lungs. Come down. Come see. It's beautiful down here. It's perfect. It's forever. Tarek woke up gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat that smelled like salt water. The dive took 6 hours to prepare. Tarek moved with mechanical precision, checking and rechecking his equipment, his gas mixture, his backup systems. This would be his deepest recovery yet. 91 meters, nearly 300 feet. At that depth, the pressure turned your blood into champagne. Nitrogen narcosis became a certainty, and the blue hole, that ancient vertical cave, became something else entirely. The father came to watch. Tarek wished he hadn't. The old man stood on the shore with red-rimmed eyes, clutching a photograph of his son, waiting for Tarek to bring back what remained. Waiting for closure, as if closure was something the blue hole allowed. Tarek entered the water just after dawn. The surface was calm, mirror-flat, reflecting the pale sky. Tourist divers bobbed near the edge of the hole, their bright wetsuits garish against the deep blue. They had no idea what swam beneath them, what waited in the arch, what lived in the spaces between the light and the dark. Tarek descended. The water temperature dropped immediately, the thermocline like a physical barrier. 15 meters down, the light started to change, taking on that peculiar underwater quality that made everything feel distant and unreal. 30 meters, and the walls of the blue hole became visible, narrowing like a funnel, like a throat. 40 meters, and Tarek could feel the narcosis creeping in, that gentle buzz of nitrogen in his brain, whispering that everything was fine, that he should go deeper, that there was something wonderful waiting just a little further down. 52 meters. The arch loomed before him, a massive opening in the wall of the hole, leading into darkness. The tourist divers called it the Arch. The locals had other names for it. The Gateway, the Mouth, the place where divers go to die. Tarek had been through the arch a dozen times on recoveries. He'd seen the tunnel beyond, the diagonal passage that led through the wall and into the open ocean. But every time he approached it, something in his hindbrain screamed at him to turn around, to surface, to get away from this place where the geometry felt wrong and the water tasted like old graves. He ignored it. He'd been ignoring it for 20 years, 70 meters. The water was nearly black now, his lights creating cone-shaped tunnels in the murk. His breathing echoed in his ears, amplified by the narcosis, turning rhythmic and hypnotic. In, out, like a heartbeat, like the blue hole breathing with him. At 80 meters, he saw the first body, not Yuri. This one had been down here longer. Much longer. The wetsuit was old style, torn and faded, covered in a thin layer of silt. The diver hung suspended in the water column, perfectly neutrally buoyant, arms spread wide like a crucifixion. The regulator still hung from the mouth, bubbles of ancient air trapped inside the first stage. Tarek had seen this body before. He'd passed it on 3 previous recoveries, had reported it to the local authorities each time. But no one wanted to bring it up. Too deep, too dangerous, too expensive. Let the blue hole have it. One more for the collection. But now, as Tarek's light swept across the figure, he saw something that made his heart stutter in his chest. The body's head had turned. It was facing him now, tracking his descent. And through the fogged mask, Tarek could see eyes. Open eyes. Watching eyes. Smiling eyes. The nitrogen narcosis, he told himself. The pressure, the darkness, playing tricks. But his hand shook as he adjusted his buoyancy, and he descended faster than he should have, eager to complete the recovery and get the hell back to the surface. 85 meters, 90. The bottom was close now. He could see it in the range of his lights, a flat expanse of silt and rock and shapes that might have been coral or might have been something else. And there, crumpled against a small outcropping, was Yuri Lipsky. The kid was face down, arms spread, weight still attached to his belt. His buoyancy control device had burst, the inflator hose dangling uselessly. The camera was still clutched in one hand, its plastic housing somehow intact at this impossible depth. Tarek began the recovery procedure. Attach the lift bag. Secure the body. Slow ascent with decompression stops. Standard protocol that felt anything but standard in this place where the water pressed against his eardrums and whispered things he couldn't quite understand. As he reached for Yuri's body, the kid's head moved, not rolling with the current. There was no current. The blue hole's water was still as a grave. No, Yuri's head turned deliberately, slowly, impossibly, and the dead eyes behind the mask found Tarek's face. And Yuri smiled. Tarek jerked backward, his breathing ragged, his heart hammering. The narcosis. It had to be the narcosis. But then Yuri's hand moved too, releasing the camera, reaching out toward Tarek with fingers that bent in ways human fingers shouldn't bend. And from somewhere below, from depths beyond 90 meters, beyond the bottom of the blue hole, Tarek heard voices, hundreds of voices, thousands, all of them calling his name in a drowning chorus. Tarek, Tarek, come down. Come see what we've found. Come join the collection. The camera drifted past his face, still recording, its red light blinking like an eye. Without thinking, Tarek grabbed it, and the moment his fingers touched the plastic housing, he saw. The blue hole wasn't a hole at all. It was a well. An ancient well that went down and down and down, far deeper than any geological survey suggested. Down past where water should exist, down into spaces that existed in the cracks between here and somewhere else. Something had been trapped down there, something vast and patient and impossibly old. Trapped when the seas rose after the last ice age. When the surface caves collapsed and became these vertical shafts, when the limestone sealed over whatever had been living in the dry caves below. But it wasn't sealed. Not completely. The arch at 52 meters wasn't a natural formation. It was a door, a mouth, a way in and a way out for things small enough to fit through. Things like water, things like nutrients, things like people. The blue hole wasn't killing divers. It was feeding them to something that lived at the bottom, something that had been hungry for thousands of years. And the bodies, the collection, they weren't just corpses. They were sentries, guards, recruiters, waiting in the dark to welcome new arrivals, to show them how beautiful it was down here in the deep, how peaceful, how perfect, how forever. Tarek screamed into his regulator and kicked for the surface. Behind him, Yuri rose too, jerking upward on his lift bag, arms spread wide, head lolling. But Tarek didn't look back. He didn't dare look back. He ascended through the darkness, through the arch, through the narrow throat of the blue hole, his breathing panicked, his training forgotten, every safety protocol abandoned in his desperate rush to get away from whatever waited below. At 40 meters, he saw them, the other bodies, At least a dozen of them hanging in the water column at various depths, all perfectly positioned, all facing upward, all watching his ascent with those terrible smiling faces. Martin and Connor at 65 meters, the old wetsuit at 80, others he'd never recovered, others he'd never even seen before. The Blue Hole's true collection, its museum of the drowned, assembled in neat formation like an honor guard, and they were all ascending with him, following him up, rising toward the light. Tarek burst through the surface, gasping, tearing the regulator from his mouth, sobbing with relief and terror. The tourist divers nearby turned to look at him, concerned, calling out, asking if he was okay. He ignored them, thrashing toward shore, dragging Yuri's body behind him on the lift bag, the camera still clutched in his other hand. The father was there on the beach, rushing forward to meet him, and Tarek pulled the body onto the sand and collapsed beside it, his chest heaving, his mind fractured. The father dropped to his knees, crying, touching his son's face, and Tarek wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him not to touch it, that it wasn't his son anymore, that whatever had been Yuri Lipsky died the moment he went too deep and felt that first whisper in his mind. But he didn't scream. He just lay there, staring up at the sky, feeling the sun on his face, grateful for the warmth, for the light, for the blessed surface world where things stayed dead when they died. Later, after the body was taken away, after the authorities had finished their questions, Tarek sat alone in his apartment and plugged the camera into his computer. He shouldn't have. He knew he shouldn't have. But some morbid curiosity, some need to understand, made him open the files and press play. The footage started normally. Yuri at the surface, fiddling with the camera, checking the housing. Other divers floating nearby. The water bright and clear. Everything fine. Everything safe. Then the descent began. Down through the thermocline, down into the narrowing throat, down toward the darkness. And Tarek watched as, at 70 meters, Yuri looked off to his right, where the camera couldn't see. Watched as Yuri's posture changed, as he stopped fighting his negative buoyancy, as he let himself sink deeper. Watched as Yuri actually removed weight from his belt at 80 meters, as he reached toward something the camera couldn't capture, as his face behind the mask shifted from panic to wonder to that terrible, peaceful smile. At 81 meters, Yuri had checked his computer and then looked down toward the bottom, and in the darkness below him, just barely visible in the frame, Tarek saw shapes, human shapes, at least 50 of them, standing on the bottom, arms raised in welcome, all of them smiling. The footage showed Yuri's last moments, the desperate inflation of his BC device, the bursting, the frantic swimming. But Tarek understood now that it was all show. Yuri wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to reach the bottom faster, trying to join the others, trying to become part of the collection. The camera cut off as Yuri settled on the bottom, and then, impossibly, it turned back on. Not the next day when they tested it. The timestamp showed it turned on 3 hours after Yuri died, at 3 in the morning, in perfect darkness at 91 meters, and for 5 seconds, the camera recorded what stood around Yuri's body, welcoming him home. Tarek ejected the memory card and threw it as hard as he could into the sea. The next day, he went back to the Blue Hole. He always went back. The job wasn't done after all. There would be another body soon. There was always another body. The Blue Hole saw to that, and someone had to retrieve them. Someone had to serve as the gravekeeper, the bone collector, the interface between the living and whatever dwelled in the deep. Tarek Omar understood his role now, understood why he could never leave Dahab, never stop diving, never turn away from the recoveries. The Blue Hole had chosen him 27 years ago when he'd brought up Martin and Connor, had marked him somehow, had shown him just enough to keep him coming back, but not so much that he'd run, because the Blue Hole needed him. Needed someone to maintain the illusion that this was just a dangerous dive site, just a geological formation with poor safety records. Needed someone to recover just enough bodies to avoid too many questions, but to leave enough down there to keep the collection growing. As Tarek stood on the shore, watching new divers enter the water, watching them descend toward the dark circle that waited in the shallows, he felt it again. That subtle pull, that whisper. The blue hole speaking in a language older than words. "Soon," it said. "Soon you'll join them. Soon you'll see how beautiful it is down here. How perfect. How forever." And Tarek, the gravekeeper, the bone collector, felt himself smile, just a little. 3 months later, on a routine recovery dive, Tarek Omar descended to 95 meters and never came back up. The other divers searched for him for hours. They found his equipment at 100 meters, neatly arranged on a ledge like an offering, but they never found his body. Though some say if you dive the blue hole at night, when the tourist divers are gone and the water is perfectly still, you can see him down there, standing with the others, arms raised, eyes open, smiling that terrible smile, waiting, always waiting, for the next one to join the collection.